fraction in simplest form. So we want the total distance, and we want our final answer to be a fraction in miles in simplest form. Is everybody clear with that? So if we want the total, then we're just going to add them all up, right? So we have 5 plus 5, that's 10, carry the 1. Then we have 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So here we have 0.80. So if I want to write this as a fraction, 0.80, if I read that correctly, is 80 hundredths, right? So 80 hundredths, right? So if I want to write that as a fraction, we're going to write 80 over 100. Okay? So now we can simplify. Now, you guys see we have 0 and 0. Both numbers end with 0. Can I just cross them out? And that is the same thing as just dividing by 10. Very good. So now we have 8 tenths, which is what you said, and then we can now divide by 2. Very good. We divide by 2, and our final answer is 4/5. Very good. So she ran 4/5 of a mile. Don't forget, with the word problems, you need to label your answer. Okay? For number 2, it says shade 25 hundredths of this design. We want to write a fraction in simplest form to represent the shaded part of the design. So first we want to figure out how many we have to fill in to shade. So when we start with 25 hundredths, okay, 0.25 is 25 hundredths. Now we can write that as a fraction. So that's going to be 25 over 100. Bless you. And now we can simplify by dividing by 25. Right? We can divide by 25. So when we do that simplification, we're going to end up with 1/4. Is everybody with me? So that is the fraction in simplest form. This is the fraction in simplest form. Now, we want to figure out what's 1/4 of this picture, right? So the first thing we need to figure out here is how many triangles do we have in that big triangle? We have 16. Is everybody with me? So we want to know what is 1/4 of the 16. So here, to make the denominator to the whole big triangle, 16, what are we going to multiply by? Right. So we're going to multiply times 4 here, and we'll multiply times 4 there. So when we do that, we end up with 4/16, where the 16 represents the whole picture, the big triangle, and the 4 represents how many little triangles get shaded. So that means we shade 4 of the little triangles. So now we're going to write decimals as fractions and mixed numbers. Make sure you write down your heading. Okay, and you don't have to write all of this, just their definition. It says here that any number that can be written as a fraction is a rational number. So decimals like 0.25, 0.15, 0.31, and 0.29, those can all be written as a fraction with a denominator of one of these. So this is 25 hundredths. So that's 25 over 100. This is 15 hundredths. So that's 15 over 100. 31 over 100. And 29 hundredths is 29 over 100. Is everybody clear with that? Now, down here, it says that decimals like 3.25, 26.82, 125.54, those can be written as mixed numbers. And then we can simplify them. So 3.25 can be written as 3 and 25 hundredths. and then you can simplify the 25 hundredths. Everybody clear with that? All right. Now, for this example, okay, we want to write each decimal as a fraction in simplest form. So when we write a decimal as a fraction, we want to read it, then we want to write it, and then we want to simplify it. Please make sure you write this down in your notes. Read it, write it, simplify it. Write that down in your notes, okay? And when we read it, we want to read it correctly, okay? So we're not going to say 0.6, we're going to say 6 tenths. Is everybody clear with that? So it's very important that you know how to read a decimal, so you need to know your place values, okay? So this is 6 tenths, and of course 6 tenths written as a fraction is 6 over 10. Then we can simplify the numerator and the denominator by dividing by 2, and we end up with 3/5. For example 2, we have 0.45. If we read that correctly, that would be 45 hundredths. Written as a fraction, that's 45 over 100, and then we can simplify that to 9/20ths. Okay? So again, read it, write it, simplify it. Same thing with to the thousandths place. This is 375 thousandths. So that's going to be 375 over 1,000, and then you can simplify that to 3/8. Is everybody clear with that? Now, when you read your decimals, you just read the number. You're going to read the number just as it is. So that says 375, correct? You're going to read 375, and then you're going to say the place value of the last number. Okay? So this is 375. This is tenths, hundredths, and thousandths. So this is 375 thousandths. So let's do these got it problems together. Okay? So here, make sure you write down your original problem. We have 0.8 for A. If I read that correctly, it's going to say 8 tenths. Then we're going to write it as a fraction. So 8 tenths is written as 8 over 10. And then, of course, we can simplify that by dividing by 2. Very good. So we end up with 4/5. Very good. All right. So how about 0.28? How do I read that? How do I read it correctly? You don't say point when you read it correctly. You don't say the point, and you don't have to, if it's not a whole number in front, you don't have to say the 0. Okay? So here you're almost there. It's just 28 hundredths. Okay? So when we write that, we write it as 28 over 100. Very good. And then we can simplify by dividing by 4. Very good. We can divide by 4. Right? In the numerator and the denominator. Make sure when you're dividing, you don't write just a big 4 there, okay? So 28 divided by 4 is 7, and 100 divided by 4 is 25. Perfect. How about you guys do letter C on your own? There's your answer. Did you get it? All right, very good. Now, what I was saying, if you couldn't see that you can divide by 125 immediately, then here you can do multiple numbers. Okay, so you can simplify little by little if you need to. Okay. All right. So for example 4, it says the average length of a conch shell is 9.85 inches. Express 9.85 as a mixed number in simplest form. So here, 9.85, when we read this correctly, is going to be 9. And remember, when you see the decimal, you mixed numbers, you say and, okay? So it's 9 and 85 hundredths. So here, the 9 is a whole number. The 85 hundredths is your fraction part, so 85 over 100. And then you can simplify the 85 hundredths, and we end up with 9 and 17 twentieths. So here, let's do this. Got it. It says it takes approximately 4.65 quarts of milk to make a pound of cheese. Express this amount as a mixed number in simplest form. So we want to express 4.65 quarts as a mixed number. So when we read this correctly, we read 4 and what? 65 hundredths. Very good. So that's 4, this is a mixed number, 4 and 65 over 100. And now we can simplify. So what can I divide by? Yep, divide by 5 in the numerator and in the denominator. And when we do that, we end up with 65 divided by 5 is 13, good. And 100 divided by 5 is 20. That's the fraction part. Don't forget, though, that we need to put that whole number part in there too, right? So that's going to be 4 and 13 twentieths. And because this is a word problem, what's my label? Quarts. Quarts. Very good. Is everybody clear? So now we're going to go in the other direction, and we are going to write fractions as mixed numbers and decimals. So now we're going from fractions and mixed numbers, and we're writing them as decimals, okay? So for fractions with denominators that are factors of 10, 100, or 1,000, you can write equivalent fractions with those denominators, okay? So if the denominator of the fraction is not 10, 100, or 1,000, sometimes we can change it. And we change it by using like our ratio tables. Remember our ratio tables where we scaled back and scaled forward? Okay, we can change the fraction so that that we have a 10 or 1,000 or 100. Okay, so here where we want to write 9/12 as a decimal. Now with 9/12, 12 is not one of those denominators that we're looking for. But if I scale back by simplifying 3/12 to 3/4 by dividing by 3, 3/4, now the 4, we can scale forward by multiplying by 25, and we end up with 100. Is everybody clear with that? So here we have 75 over 100, which is now 0.75. And then, of course, method 2, if you cannot scale forward or scale back, then you can always use your long division and divide the numerator divided by the denominator. So let's do these got it problems, okay? So here for E, we have 3/5, 3/5, and we want the denominators to be either a 10, a 100, or a 1,000, okay? So for 3/5, what can I change the 5 to? 10, very good. So we're going to multiply the denominator by 2. And if I multiply the denominator by 2, I have to do the same in the numerator. Is everybody with me? So here, we're going to end up with 6 over 10. And now to write this as a decimal, that's going to be 0.6. Beautiful. How about letter F? What can I make the 25 into so it will be easy for me to change it to a decimal? 100. Very good. So here, I'm going to multiply the 25 times 4 and the numerator times 4. So when we do that, we end up with 14 times 4 is, good, 56. And 25 times 4 is 100. So 56 over 100 written as a decimal is 0.56. Very good. All right, how about you guys do letter G, and I'll show you the solution afterwards. So for 102 over 250, we're going to multiply by 4 in the numerator and denominator, and we get 408 over 1,000, which gives us 0.408 as a decimal. All right, a caterpillar can have as many as 4,000 muscles compared to humans who have about 600. Write the length of the caterpillar as a decimal. So here, there's the length of the caterpillar. It's 1 3/8 inches. So here, we can separate the whole number and the fraction part, and then change the fraction to a decimal, and then we can put them back together. So here, we've got the 1 for the whole number. The 3/8 can change to 375 over 1,000, and which is 0.375, and then we can add them back together, so we end up with 1.375, which is 1 375 thousandths. So the length of the caterpillar is 1.375 inches.